evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It's October 6th, 2024. I'm your host, Nate Pike. We have a lot of ground to cover tonight. Alberta Politics was as Alberta Politics is prone to being these days. So there's no shortage of things to talk about. And we are going to get it towards the end of the show. We got us a FOIP back. We did. And it's another spicy one. So stick around for that part. Before we get into it, we're going to do something that we've never done before. We're going to take a quick sec. I'm going to say, happy anniversary, Stephen. There you go. Jumping right into things, though. One of the big conversations that's been going on in the province of Alberta around the question of what are the agendas, what are the groups, what's going on, has had to do with women's right to access healthcare, women's right to access abortion. Now, for a little bit of context, a few years ago under the NDP, there was a law that was put into place that basically said, hey, you know what? We believe in freedom of speech. We believe in your charter rights to freedom of expression. We're not quite sure, though, if that includes harassing and victimizing women who are attempting to access abortion services. That seems like maybe that's not so much in the spirit of a charter, when it's not just a protest, when it's actual harassment of people who are simply trying to access healthcare. The NDP put that rule in, and apparently there's some folks who not only don't like it, they've got some money to spend on some advertisements, because we couldn't help but notice that this week our Alberta friendly neighborhood. Is it still friendly neighborhood when your publisher is waiting to hear a verdict on whether or not he threatened kids? I'm just not sure. It's so complicated these days. The Western Standard started running this advertisement right here. And what this advertisement is it's saying to pop the Alberta bubble zones. The bubble zones are those areas around abortion clinics that I mentioned earlier, where it's saying, hey, you know what? Maybe a little bit of a buffer space between the people who are making some of the hardest decisions of their life potentially, and the, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for here, the assholes who want to enforce their own beliefs on them. Maybe there should be a little bit of a buffer zone in between those two things. Well, somebody is paying to run ads on the Western Standard, because, of course, it's the Western Standard, making the argument that you should sign a petition if you believe in free speech. There are certain places where it's reasonable to say this is private property. There are certain places where it's reasonable to say, hey, you know what? You can have your free speech, but maybe not inflicting it on another person, maybe not putting up graphic images. Maybe that's not the bestest of the ways to go. But nonetheless, Western Standard's running those ads. But, and it's been a bit of a break for the kids at the Western Standard. We can help but notice that shortly after we did our episode where we talked about the Western Standard, who absolutely doesn't take Justin Trudeau's subsidies, is very happy to take Danielle Smith's subsidies, because not only has she been funding to have the Western Standard's content funneled into a news aggregator, she's paid for subscriptions in the tens, if not hundreds, for Government of Alberta employees who want to read the Western Standard. There's also been some government advertising that's gone towards the Western Standard. Now we've got a request in to see if we can get the numbers, but it's back after like a 6-month break. It seems the Western Standard's advertising is back with the Government of Alberta, which you assume they're getting the monies for. So they're telling people to skip student debt and go right to the money-making part by getting into the trades. Now, to be clear, this isn't a dunk on the trades. It's just an observation that a news organization that says if you take any money from the government, then you're corrupt, but only if it's Justin Trudeau's government. If you take money from the Conservative government, then it's fine. If you take it from Danny, that's not in any way corruptive. You see, it's not the principles, it's the people, would apparently be the logic, which is absolutely not true. Moving on from there. And we're going to get through the short ones quick, because we've got some bigger things to unpack as we get through this episode tonight. We're going to see if we have time, hopefully at the end, for our town hall which is truly open to anybody who's on the Twitter Spaces. You don't have to have a breakdown membership to engage with us. We certainly wouldn't revoke any. We don't sell memberships. I'm just doing a bit from last week's episode. But cost of living has been one of the big conversations that's been going on in the province of Alberta and across all of Canada. And some of you may be, it's getting harder to avoid. The BC folks, they seem to be deeply committed to trying to show Alberta how it's really done when it comes to the wait, what in politics. And so there's been a lot of this is the one party that stopped being a party, and then they folded into the Conservative Party, and then it's a whole thing, and the conspiracy theories there too. But cost of living, top of the issue. And we saw a fascinating little piece of analysis from economist Jim Stanford on the Twitter machine, where he was talking about StatsCan information, readily accessible to anyone, that shows the difference in insurance prices across the country. How much, who's done well over the last 6 years, who has not done well over the last 6 years. And I think the point that Mr. Stanford was going for, I suspect, was probably, hey, you know what? BC's actually done really well. Our insurance costs have actually gone down. And if you take a look at the actual graph, what it actually shows is there's been a net reduction of 6.6% in the cost of insurance towards BC. But if you go just one province over and one line over on the graph, there's Alberta. And this is stunning because between 2017 to 2023, the cumulative change for passenger car insurance premiums went up over 6 years, 41.8%, which is the worst in all of Canada, which is really quite stunning. And it's stunning not only because that's not an Alberta advantage. Being number one for the most expensive increase in insurance premiums is not an advantage. But it's also fascinating because it's one of the things that the UCP actually have direct levers that they could influence. They could put caps on insurance premiums. They could put caps on increases in insurance premiums. A lot of different things that the UCP could do, but they haven't done those things. Don't worry. I know everybody's I chose the shirt is a deliberate choice this week. They have done some other things that we're for sure going to talk about later, but they haven't done anything meaningful, clearly, to address the cost of insurance. Which brings us to, and this is the wild thing. Normally we save the really off the rails stuff, I'll say cautiously. Normally we save this for the end of the show, but it's been just that kind of week in Alberta that we're going to just start in with the really, really wild stuff right out of the gates, because Danielle Smith has been having, I guess you could possibly call them town halls. Now, calling them town halls is a little bit disingenuous. It's a little bit problematic because historically at a town hall, everybody from the town is able to go. But these haven't been town halls in that sense. What these have been is UCP member meetings where everybody can come and they can ask their questions as long as they have a UCP membership and Dustin Van Vogt is not very, very, very angry at them. Then they can go and they can attend and they can ask their questions. Now, what's wild about these town halls is they've been recorded, as we've seen, and B, they again capture Danielle Smith in her natural element. And we're going to play the clip because if you somehow manage to miss it, it really is something to behold. And we're going to start with this clip, but it's important to highlight we got a couple other clips from the same town hall that we're going to talk about. But we're going to start with we're going to start with the chemtrail one.
been able to do is talk to the woman who is responsible for controlling the airspace, and she says no one is allowed to go up and spray anything in the air. We have she's told me, the other person told me that if anyone is doing it, it's the U.S. Department of Defense. And I have some limitations in what I can do in my job. I don't know that I would have much power if that is the case, if the U.S. Department of Defense is spraying us. So I will do what I can to investigate, but everywhere I have gone, I have found no evidence that there's any private sector company involved. My environment department's not involved. My airports tell me that they have a record of every single plane that goes up. So I'm kind of dead-ended here. If you have some special lead that you want to give me afterwards, please let me know and I'll track it down.
Now, there have been some people who have tried to unpack that clip. There have been some pundits, some media elites, let's call them, who have said, well, here's what happened. Danny was starting to give the answer. She was starting to say, hey, you know what? Maybe the chemtrail's not so much a thing, but she could tell because she's such a skilled communicator. Sure, we can go with that. That she was losing the room. So she did what any good communicator would do. And she said, but it could be the United States Department of Defense because, it has been a little while since the Premier of Alberta has initiated an international incident. Let's get it done. Let's get another one on the books, shall we? And there's a lot of problems with that argument. So first of all, if Danielle Smith was hosting just her radio show, or she was just hosting, I don't know, a live streaming podcast or something like that, then if you're looking for an entertainer, if you're looking for a pop star, somebody who's able to read the room and adjust their performance so that it meets the needs and expectations of the people who paid tickets to go see, I don't know, NSYNC or something, then yeah, there's an argument to be made there because reading a room and directing the energy of a live room is a skill. Now, there's a lot of performers who would say, I don't do that because I do my art or my performance for me as an expression of my own thing. But there are a lot of performers whose job it is to go out there, read the room, give the room what they want. And the argument is that's what Danielle Smith was doing. But she wasn't just doing a radio show. She wasn't just acting in the capacity as a pundit or a media personality. She's acting in the capacity as the Premier of Alberta. And this is where it takes a certain degree of actual leadership to be able to say to somebody who's asked a question like that, hey, you know what? I appreciate where you're coming from. And I know there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there that's around this particular topic. I know there's a lot of people who have some really strong feelings about this particular topic, but I have to tell you, it simply isn't true. The trails that form behind the plains, that's water condensing because of altitude. That's really all it is. It's no different than when steam comes out of chimneys. So I'm very, very sorry to have to take that position with you, but I'm afraid that's just the reality and the truth. That's what you would expect from a leader, especially if they were trying to give the person who was asking the question some dignity or maybe not just respond with that's stupid, no. And I feel like I can speak with a little bit of experience on that topic because when we've had our call-in sections on the show before, we don't screen them. We're not your province or premier. And there have been people who have come on and said some pretty outlandish things. And as the host of the show, it's been my responsibility to say, well, that's not true. And thank you very much. That's part of the role. And if Danielle Smith is so ill-equipped for the role of premier that she isn't able to say, no, that's not a thing in a gentle way and be okay with losing that particular room or that particular segment of the room, then she's not fit for the job of premier. It's just that simple. And in fact, there's even an argument to be made that if any of her MLAs and ministers who were surrounding her knew anything about the art of politics, they would have jumped on that hand grenade for her and said, you know what, let me take that one. Here's the reality. It's not a thing. I know there's a lot of people who think it's a thing, but it's not a thing. And I'm not going to stand by idly while the premier has to answer a question like that. But none of them did that either, because Danielle Smith wants the microphone at all times. There's 50 different ways that she could have avoided that question, short of creating an international incident, but create an international incident she sure did. And so we saw over the course of the next couple of days, journalists actively going out and having to talk to the Pentagon, talk to NORAD, talk to NAV Canada, Sean Amato. This tweet is just pure gold. So I was emailing with the Pentagon, ellipsis. They say they don't know what Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is talking about. I realize this will not convince any chemtrail believers. I'm just doing my job over here. And the Pentagon PA duty officer press operations said, hey, Sean, we do not have anything to provide. You'd have to ask her what she meant. Also, NORAD would be the appropriate group to speak about joint U.S.-Canadian operations over Canada. But that didn't stop there. Press Progress did a whole story on the NORAD allegations. The Pentagon and NORAD are denying Alberta Premier Danielle Smith's suggestion that they're spraying chemicals over Alberta. Charles Rusnell, investigative reporter for the Tyee, long history of investigative journalism. Not sure who the woman that Danielle Smith said controls the airspace over Alberta, but NavCan does, and they said they have no contact from anyone in the Alberta government about chemtrails. And this is where it starts to get particularly interesting, because Danielle Smith in that clip said, hey, you know what? I've done my due diligence. I've investigated this. Nobody knows anything. I talked to the lady. There's no one lady. I talked to the lady who runs the airspace. She says there's no chemtrails. And the press secretary, Danielle Smith's new press secretary, maybe that's relevant for a little bit later, issued a statement to, again, Sam Amato, where she said the premier has heard concerns from many Albertans about this topic. In response, the provincial government looked into the issue and found no evidence of chemtrails occurring in Alberta. The premier was simply sharing what she's heard from some folks over the summer on the issue. She was not saying that she believed that the U.S. government was using chemtrails in Alberta, except that is kind of what she was saying. What she was saying was, there's nothing on our end, but if there is, you should go talk to that guy. She was using the United States Department of Defense as a literal scapegoat. Literally, that's what the term means. I'm going to put it on this person over here. They'll make the problem go away for me. That's literally what she was doing. So the retconning statement from the premier's new press secretary is a fascinating statement to make, but it also, again, doubles down on the idea that Alberta government, taxpayer-funded Alberta government resources, looked into the question of chemtrails, but apparently not with any of the people who would actually know if that was a thing, which unequivocally, let's be clear, it's not. It's not a thing. It's just, it's not. But that wasn't all that Danielle Smith shared some thought. That's the clip that got all the attention. But there's a couple of other things that we wanted to highlight that came out of that particular town hall. One of them was a question in regards to family support for children with disabilities.
As my minister concerned, he's worried that people are moving here just to be able to access the benefits that we do have, which is what making the waiting list longer and not allowing us to clear that backlog. So we have to do something about that. And I don't know if it's a matter of having a qualifying period where you have to be here for, like we do this as well. If you leave the country, you have to come back for 6 months before you're allowed to get health care again. So we're looking at ways to make sure that we put those who've been on the list the longest, make sure that we're addressing their needs. The demand is extraordinary. I mean, we had 200,000 people come in 2023. We've had, I think, already 50,000 people come at the beginning part of this year. And so as we want to make sure that we can keep up with growth.
Now, it's getting a little tiring, the constant answer to the mismanagement of a number of programs being attributed to, it's just been the last 18 months, because first of all, that would have been under this government, under this premier. So, not quite sure how that's a get out of jail free card. But the constant returning to the idea of, it's all these new people, it's all the immigrants, is a ugly, untrue dog whistle. And it's unfortunate that Premier of Alberta doesn't seem to be able to recognize what the actual requirements are to get access to the Alberta Healthcare Insurance Plan, or AHCIP. Because you could just go to the Government of Alberta website and you could just read off of the Government of Alberta website, you are eligible for Alberta Healthcare Insurance Plan coverage if you are legally entitled to be in and remain in Canada and make your permanent home in Alberta, committed to being physically present in Alberta for at least 183 days in any 12-month period, not claiming residency or obtaining benefits under claim of residency in another province, territory, or country. Any other person deemed by the regulations to be a resident or temporary resident, not including a tourist, transient, or visitor to Alberta. So if you live in Alberta and you plan on staying here for at least half the year, then you're eligible for Alberta healthcare. Period. And it's important to highlight that it is not that you've been documented to have been in the province. That's not the language that's on the Government of Alberta website. The website is that you are committed to being physically present in Alberta for at least 183 days in any 12-month period. This is how a lot of snowbirds get to keep their Alberta health care coverage. You just have to be committed to it. So if somebody was able to demonstrate that you had been not in the country for 183 days in a 12-month period, then you might be getting yourself into a little bit of trouble. But Alberta healthcare exists as a creature of the Canada Health Act. So anywhere somebody goes in Canada, they're supposed to get the same kinds of services. Now, access to those services may be up for a little bit of debate, but again, those services for people who are covered under Alberta healthcare are prioritized on a number of different factors. It's just not, I'm the new person and raised my hand. It's not how it works. So the notion that there are a boatload of people who are moving to Alberta just to access Alberta healthcare and making that commitment to live here for 6 months because they really want their hip surgery or they really want their knee surgery is at best a bit of a stretch, if not a statistical rounding error. But that's not all that Danielle Smith decided that she wanted to bring up. She wanted to talk about the state of healthcare delivery because somebody asked her the question about, hey, what about Edmonton South Hospital? We were supposed to get a hospital. There was money set aside. I remember there was this former justice minister of yours who maybe had a propensity for speeding tickets and violating the Ethics Act and trying to interfere in the administration of justice. He said that the funds were secured. What's going on?
Like Airdrie's feels the exact same way. So let me tell you what we're looking at doing. So Airdrie was also bursting at the seams the same way. So they developed an urgent care center, and I just went and toured it. It's an old public library. They have like styrofoam walls and shower curtains that are divvying up the different treatment bays, and that's not appropriate either. So we know that we need to develop a different type of urgent care center that allows you to have a place to go for emergency, and maybe the inpatient beds can be somewhere else if we're doing surgery somewhere else. So we're going to have a model for a new urgent care center that can be rolled out in these high demand areas, but also in rural Alberta as well. So there's a whole strategy coming. We have to make sure that we're putting the right type of facility in the right place. So I'll take that away to you.
So Again, if you've been following the show, we've talked about this before. Danielle Smith is showing her hand because the facility that she's talking about in Airdrie was an $85,000 gift to a physician and his company in Airdrie to develop a business case for a private for-profit, still taxpayer funded, but private for-profit urgent care center slash giant primary care facility. This is the facility that would have the urgent care, emergency medical care on the main floor. And then on the second floor would be a private doctor's office. Now, again, it's not a big deal to have a private doctor's office because almost all doctor's offices in the province of Alberta are private companies. That's just how the business of doing primary care has worked in the province of Alberta, mostly across the country as well. So that's not anything new. But to say we're going to get this private for-profit company to administer emergency health care, that is brand new. And it touched off a big firestorm in Airdrie because a lot of people were asking, hey, what's going on with this? This doesn't make a whole lot of sense because normally if I want to go to an emergency room or an urgent care, then I just go, and that's run by Alberta Health Services. But Danielle Smith has made it very, very clear that she wants to dismantle Alberta Health Services. And so she's using Airdrie as a trial ground to beta test this idea of, well, what if we just had one big urgent care that was run by a private for-profit company using taxpayer dollars, and they did the urgent care stuffs, and if that works, then we could just drop that all over the province. Heck, we could maybe export it to different parts of Canada. Wouldn't that just be delightful? It's like the Peter Lougheed era hospitals in rural Alberta, but for profit, which is problematic because if you're going to spend, let's say $10 million, I'm making up numbers, but let's say you're going to spend $10 million on an urgent care facility in Airdrie that's going to be administered and run by a public body. There's no need for a profit margin. But if you have a private company doing it, that does have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, to their owners, to turn a profit, something's got to give. There's going to be things that happen in that private for-profit, privately owned for-profit facility. There's going to be corners that get cut. And there's no shortage of evidence to back that up. So that's the model that Danielle Smith is very clearly saying, it's not just a trial in Airdrie. This is a beta test for a much larger deployment and a redesign of healthcare across the province. Sticking with the theme, though, of the shirt, we're going to switch gears, and we got to come back, and I can't believe we have to do this again. We're talking about the electronic vote tabulator. We have a picture of a vote tabulator, and it looks just like a Scantron machine. You'll see nowhere is there a I'd like to vote for candidate A or candidate B, because electronic tabulators are not what's used to cast votes. Electronic tabulators are used to count votes. Two very, very, very different things. The paper ballots still exist. They're just counted by a machine to get you quicker results, which should be in just about every universe you would think of fine. But there has been a conspiracy theory that's been imported from the United States largely in regards to the election tampering that saw Donald Trump lose the election that he rightfully lost. If my voice doesn't convey it, I'm doing a lot of air quotes because that had to do with the Dominion lawsuit, the Dominion election voting machines lawsuit. Dominion sued Fox News. Dominion took Fox News out for an absolute walk. Tucker Carlson was fired from Fox News. And this is where, again, the ecosystem of the far right media piece gets to be really important to unpack, because in that whole lawsuit, there were a bunch of text messages that were shared where most of the major personalities knew that they were lying to their audience. They knew that they were manipulating their audience. They knew that they were just trying to make their audience as angry as they possibly could so they could sell, I guess, catheters. I don't watch Fox News. It's been a while, but I do remember there being a lot of catheter commercials and oats. I don't know. But they lost that lawsuit. Fox News did. So the whole question of the tampering with the electronic voting machines is A, not a thing, and B, not at all relevant to the question of electronic tabulators. And there has been some conflation that has occurred by somebody who you would think knows how elections work in the province of Alberta.
Machines is actually a perfect example. Today we saw the members of Alberta municipalities vote 85%. They don't want you to take away their vote counting machines because it's going to cost them money, it's going to cost them human resources. 85%. So this is one of the latest examples, some would argue, some of your critics would argue, that you are governing right now in the interests of a very narrow set of people in your party. How would you react to that criticism? That right now you're governing for about 5,000 people who are going to show up to the AGM and not all Albertans?
Look, we're not always going to agree with the municipalities. They also debated a motion to allow permanent residents the ability to vote, even though our Constitution says you have to be a citizen. So those are the kind of things where you have to make sure that municipalities are going to honor the laws of our land. And one of the things I would say about municipal government is that they operate within the parameters that we set under the Municipal Government Act. They are a creature of the provincial government. And as a provincial government, we have heard that people want to go back to paper ballots. So we've started with municipalities, and we're going to be doing that at the provincial level too.
Did you catch it? Right at the end there? People want to go back to paper ballots. Implication being, we've stopped using paper ballots. It's a pretty clear little torquing of, I don't know, reality to say people want to go back to paper ballots. Because again, these are tabulating machines that count the ballots that are paper. It doesn't get rid of the paper ballots. It just counts them, in a perfect world, faster. But maybe she was just misspeaking. It's not like, as we showed last week, there's a second clip where she doubles down on this idea that somehow in the province of Alberta, we've abandoned paper ballots. Is there?
It's just, did things get better or worse when we moved away from paper ballots? And they got worse. Were we able to validate a close race is better or worse? Well, it got worse. I mean, you don't make a decision that makes things progressively worse and then not sort of revisit the original decision. So they blew it. And because they blew it, people are wanting to go back to paper ballots. So that's what we're going to do.
That was Danielle Smith on Your Province, Your Premier on September 28th, just 2 days after the municipalities conference, where she didn't just say people want to go back to paper ballots. She straight up says that we moved away from paper ballots. And that is not true. She didn't just say it once in that clip. She says it twice. It's a lie. It's a lie that feeds into the conspiracy theories of, oh, well, we had these electronic voting machines. And Danielle Smith said it on her radio show. We moved away from paper ballots. The Premier of Alberta wouldn't lie, would she? It's not like she's ever said to a room of people on a broadcast that she has actually a fairly firm grasp of the difference between tabulators and electronic voting machines, is there?
Some concern about it, but I have confirmed through department officials that all of the votes on election day will be hand counted. My understanding of how these voting machines work is that it is a paper ballot, and even though the tabulation takes place electronically, we retain a paper ballot so that if there is Any issue of needing to do a recount, we'll be able to go back to the paper ballots to do that. So I've asked my department officials to look into it again, just to make sure that there aren't any concerns, and they've come back to me and told me that the hand count will take place the day of, and that we will retain paper copies in the event that there is any issue that needs to require a recount.
Just as a follow-up here, I mean, we've all seen what happened in the U.S. presidential election, where millions of Americans, doubt the legitimacy of their election results. Considering that a lot of Albertans do have problems with tabulators, would it be better just simply not to use them and to count all the ballots by hand, including those in the advanced polls?
I've used Scantron machines before, where you have a paper ballot and then it goes through and it's electronically tabulated. And I've also witnessed, even in my home town of High River, they had to do that very same night, a hand count, because it was so close. So I have confidence that because we have the ability to do a hand count as a follow-up in the event there are close results, that I believe that that's going to be sufficient. I think that the issue in the United States was that there are machines where you don't also have a paper tabulator. My understanding is that we're going to retain both, so that we are always able to make sure that we can do a secondary count if the count is close. That's, I think, something that people expect of democracy, that you should be able to verify a vote if results end up very close.
So just to be clear, that was Danielle Smith in April of 2023, just over a year ago, where she had a full grasp of the difference between electronic tabulators and electronic voting machines. So much so that she even pushed back against David Parker's wife, that was Rachel Emanuel, now going by Rachel Parker, who was asking that question, saying, well, so many Albertans have problems with the tabulators. Just because you say something that you want to be true doesn't make it true. What does make it true, though, is when the Premier of Alberta leans into that narrative, which is demonstrably false, because the Premier demonstrated it to be false. What makes it real is when she starts to then turn around and in multiple different venues, including one, which is a radio program that gets turned into a bunch of different formats as well, that goes out to the entire province. It goes out to the two biggest municipalities, Calgary and Edmonton, and all of the broadcast areas. And then as well, for anybody who has internet, they can do the internet radio now. For her to say on there that the province of Alberta has moved away from paper ballots is demonstrably false, and it's a lie. And it's a lie that feeds into conspiracy theory rhetoric. And the reason why this is so important, A, to call out, but B, to highlight, well, there's a couple of reasons, actually. So the first reason why it's so important to call out is because Danielle Smith has a huge pulpit. She has a huge microphone that she gets to avail herself of whenever she chooses. And if you have a microphone and you have the privilege of having an audience of any kind, then you have a responsibility to make sure that you're not deliberately and willfully misleading people. But the fact that Danielle Smith a year ago knew that and has since changed her mind to somehow Alberta has, in the last year, moved away from paper ballots, we haven't, demonstrates the willingness to lie to her audience. And you don't have to suppose why. It's pretty clear. But it's part of a broader theme. Danielle Smith is leaning into this rhetoric because she's got her AGM coming up in a few weeks. And at that AGM, there's going to be a leadership review. And if she doesn't get really great numbers at that leadership review, it will mean her job, and it will potentially mean her legacy as well. But it's also part of a much larger trend. And this is the part that Albertans, and yes, the two, maybe three conservatives who listen to this show should be really alarmed by. Because when it's in Danielle Smith's own interest, she will lie to you. She will do it convincingly. She will do it well. And that only makes it more dangerous. And this brings us to another one of Danielle Smith's poor relationships with the truth. Some of you might remember a little while ago, September 1st, in fact, Danielle Smith announced that there was going to be, it's going to be a broadcast to the province. They bought the airtime, and it was going to go out on all the news centers, and it was going to be this huge announcement for how Danielle Smith was going to fix something. I think it might have been education. What she announced wasn't that. What she announced was a new accelerator program. And what this accelerator program was is it was going to increase the K through 12 capital budget by $8.6 billion by 2026, 2027. Now, there's a bunch of verbiage in there that we have to take a sec to make sense of, because when we're talking about the K through 6 capital budget, we're talking about the buildings part. We're talking about the structures. But embedded in this, there were also a few other changes. One of them is, historically, when the province has built a new school, they've turned around and they've handed it to the school board in that area to operate. And this is also important, to maintain. What the province has said with this announcement is, but what if we kept it? Because that way we still have the capital on our books. So despite the fact that we spent $8.6 billion, we'll also be able to say that we own $8.6 billion worth of buildings. So no loss, which is a clever accounting trick. But as with a lot of the policies that we've seen from Danielle Smith, it's not particularly well thought out, because the immediate question is then, okay, so let's say a water fountain breaks. Let's say there's flooding. Well, if the province of Alberta are the people responsible for the building, how quickly can they move the pieces into place in that one community to get the flooding addressed? Historically, that's something that would have been done in-house through organizations like the Edmonton Public School Board or the Calgary Board of Education. Now the province is maybe going to be assuming that risk. But one of the other things that they announced is that they were also going to be expanding this program to include private for-profit schools. Now, Danielle Smith really likes to call them independent schools because freedom of choice and junk. But there's two very basic truths that you have to acknowledge when you're talking about independent schools. First of all, we're not talking about schools like the Calgary Board of Education, where the goal is to, all right, let's take as much money as we can and put it directly towards the students and the teachers and the things and the stuff. As soon as you're talking about these private for-profit independent schools, now you're talking about, okay, so how do we pay for some of the things for the kids, but also our president, Joe, he wanted that new yacht and he needs a dock too. So I guess we're going to have to figure out how we're going to move some of the money away from the kids into the heavily padded salaries of the people who own the school. Well, they own the contents of the school, but not the building. But this is where the second piece gets to be really problematic, because when we're talking about the vast majority by number of independent schools, we're talking about religious schools. And that's fine. If somebody wants to have a private for-profit religious school, I mean, you could take that up with whatever deity you choose to subscribe to. But there's some details here that, again, don't appear to be particularly thought out. One of them we learned this week is, what's the process? Because there's two Muslim schools in Edmonton that have already reached out to the provincial government and said, hey, we have the ground, we have the shovels, we have the permits. We'd like to build our religious school, please and thank you. We would like to get this money, please. And the response from the government has been, oh, yeah. Well, see, Danny made the announcement, but she didn't, we don't know how we're going to do that yet. So we don't have a process yet. We're going to work on that. We'll get back to you. So great big announcement without any of the things having actually been done yet is a little bit problematic. But even more problematic is if the province of Alberta says to one of these religious schools, and I want to be clear, I don't care what religious school it is. If it's a private, independent, for-profit school that's getting taxpayer money, If you can say no to students getting into your school, I have some questions. Just speaking for myself personally. And it doesn't matter what religion you're a part with. There's just some questions. I'm not sure the taxpayer money should be going towards those things. I haven't seen a convincing, compelling argument for that as of yet. But that argument only gets compounded when you think about the fact that when you're talking about many of these religious schools, they'll have things like chapels. And so that means that the province of Alberta, the government of Alberta, will be in the business of owning and maintaining religious spaces. Because if we're talking about a Christian school that has a chapel, then we're talking about the government of Alberta owning and maintaining a chapel. Conversely, if we're talking about a Muslim school, most Muslim schools have mosques in them. So now we're going to have the government of Alberta owning and maintaining mosques, which becomes deeply, deeply problematic on a whole bunch of levels. And the point, again, is not to dunk on any of these religious institutions. If the expression that gets thrown around a lot of religion is the opiate of the masses is misinterpreted a great deal of the time. And I'm going to riff a little bit on Kurt Vonnegut here, but Kurt Vonnegut had a much more insightful interpretation of it, because he said his interpretation wasn't it's the opiate of the masses because religion gets people high. Mr. Vonnegut's interpretation was it's the opiate of the masses because it makes the pain of existence less. And as long as you're not hurting anybody, fill your boots. Mr. Vonnegut was a humanist. I subscribe to the very, very similar approach when it comes to the question of religion. Believe in whatever you want. If it makes life easier for you, if it gives you purpose, if it lessens the pain of existence, fill your boots. But it's your choice. It shouldn't be anybody else's choice. It's certainly not a choice that should be forced on anyone else. And I have, as I said a minute ago, I haven't seen a compelling argument that that individual choice should be subsidized by everybody else who maybe doesn't share that belief, or who even does. Because when you have governments that have religious bents, that tends to create a lot of problems historically. Moving on from there, I just want to say, before we get into this topic, and I am as cisgendered, straight, middle-aged white guy as it gets. I've owned that on the show many times. I will continue to do so because I think it's important that I say it, and I think it's important that people hear it. But the way the Danielle Smith and the UCP have committed to punching down on vulnerable youth, I'm just so done with it. And I'm not done with it in the sense of, and therefore I'm going to stop speaking out about it, because obviously we're about to do a whole segment on it. But I'm done with the fact that Danielle Smith and the UCP are comfortable punching down. I'm done with the fact that Danielle Smith and the UCP are comfortable gaslighting Albertans, that they're comfortable emotionally manipulating Albertans. So yeah, we're here now to talk about Danielle Smith's latest announcement, not made via press conference, where she might have to answer some questions, where she might have to deal with some potential accountability. Not with that. The new thing that the Premier of Alberta likes to do is issue sweeping edicts by pre-recorded videos, where she has all of the chances that she needs to get the language and the tone exactly right, where she can read off of a teleprompter unchallenged, where she's not going to be asked any questions about why she's continuing to pursue a policy that experts across the board have said is going to create harm. This is how we do things in Alberta now with the Danielle Smith model of communications. And it's quite frankly beneath Albertans. But she did it, so we got to talk about it. And we're going to start by talking about how she introduced the language of the new policies.
complex and often deeply emotional topics. As someone who personally understands the profound impact and challenges these issues can cause children and their families, I want to make it clear that our government is here to support and uplift every child and every family of a child who identifies as transgender or who is struggling with gender dysphoria. And more specifically to those children and youth, I want you to know that you are loved. I care deeply about each of you, and you are valued as much as anyone else in our province and in our communities. I am absolutely committed to ensuring that you receive the support you and your family may need during this critical time of growth and self-discovery. I also want you to know that I and those who serve with me in our government are bringing in these new rules for only one purpose. We believe it's vitally important to preserve the time you have as a youth to gain sufficient amount of knowledge, experience, and perspective so that you can fully understand who you are, who you want to be, and what opportunities you may want to have as an adult before making permanent life-altering decisions related to your body. That is so very important to understand. And anyone who claims that these rules were designed to target or somehow harm you in any way are mistaken. Although questioning or disagreeing with these new policies is any person's democratic right, adults who choose to tell children and youth that these policies were designed to hurt them or marginalize them, that kind of rhetoric is irresponsible and harmful to the young people involved, and it is entirely false. I sincerely hope that we adults can debate the proposed legislation with maturity and compassion, rather than question each other's motives at the expense of the children and youth who will be listening to the debate.
Now that's some next level bullshit. And that's some next level bullshit for a bunch of reasons. And I probably should, at this point, say there may be profanity as we work our way through this, because what Danielle Smith is doing in that chunk of video is she's trying to say, she's trying to speak directly to the kids. Hey, you know what? I'm just trying to preserve your childhood. I'm going to completely ignore the fact that if you're dealing with something like gender dysphoria, that affects you on the daily, and that getting treatment for that under the appropriate medical supervision would make your life better. It would give you a much better quality of life. It would improve so many different things for you. I'm just going to ignore that entirely. And what I'm going to say is, we just want you to just sit with all of that. Just sit and wait until not a pediatrician, not an endocrinologist, not a specialist of any kind, but a political hack who will, as we just demonstrated in earlier segments, lie to people. She's trying to weaponize the kids now by saying to the kids, hey, anybody who says that these policies are about anything other than just loving and protecting on you so hard, they're just trying to hurt you. They're hurting the argument. That is some next level, craven, devious bullshit. Period. You want to talk about divisive rhetoric? You're saying to the kids that anybody who says to the kids, hey, this is some pretty fucked up stuff that we're trying to navigate here. And I'm so sorry that the Premier of Alberta has decided that with her no background in psychology or medicine or anything else that's pertinent other than her personal experience, I'm sorry that this is what's happening to you. I'm sorry that she's doing these things against the better advice of all of the experts, against the Alberta section of pediatrics, against the Alberta Medical Association, against the Canadian Medical Association, against all of these people. I'm sorry that she believes that she just knows better. And since she put it on the table, it's time to have part of the conversation that a lot of us have been dancing around for far too long. And I'm going to get some trouble for this. Danielle Smith has made it clear that the most important thing in this whole conversation for her is to make sure that kids don't lose the ability, not that they do, they don't lose the ability to have kids. And at a certain point, we have to ask the question, how much of this is personal bias? It's well documented that Danielle Smith is unable to have children, and that is tragic, and that is sad. But the fact that she is pursuing policies that go so far against the science and the medicine and the experts, the fact that the consultation that she did for this program was purely performative and only in how should we implement these policies, not should we implement these policies. The consultation was, how do we find the doctors who are going to try to do this stuff anyways? How should we penalize them? It wasn't, are these policies sound? Are they evidence-based? Are they going to do more harm? And as we discussed on last week's episode, introducing legislation, politicizing the conversations that should be happening in doctors' offices increases the risk of suicide for trans youth by up to 72%. And I'm sorry, I just can't have this conversation anymore without bringing up the fact that there should be a question asked. Is this all just because Danny can't have kids? I have had so many conversations with so many people since you rolled these policies out saying that I could not go there. 72%. She is bringing forward policies that are going to kill kids. She is doing it in the face of all available expertise and evidence. And she's not, as much as she's trying to say there, hey kids, come meet me over at camera 2. I'm doing this for you. At this point in the conversation, I think it is only fair to ask, is this not being in any way driven by your own personal trauma? And if it is it maybe time to take a step back? Because the pursuit of just pursuing the reproductive viability of human beings who are dealing with a diagnosable condition it should be beneath all of us. But she doesn't even care that it's going to put kids at risk. That's not, again, the concern. She spent the whole introduction saying, hey, you know what, kids, we're just trying to protect you. We're just trying to make it about you. But as she says later in the video, that's so clearly not the case.
Circumstances where a teacher feels that a child might be at risk should the parents be notified of a desired name or pronoun change. Alberta Education will provide a protocol to ensure the protection of that child throughout the parental notification process.
So even if the teachers have reason to believe that the kids are, that kid, if you go to their parents, that kid has somehow expressed to the teacher in a substantial way, I really don't want my parents to know about this. I'm afraid of what might happen. I'm afraid I'll be at risk. And it's important to lean into the Premier's own language here, because she's not saying, well, the parents might be unhappy. Might be an awkward conversation. She's saying if the teachers believe that the kids are at risk, the notification will still happen, but there will be some kind of protocol. It's not defined. And it doesn't change the fact that that kid will still be at risk. So it's not about protecting the kids. What this is about at its core is protecting the reproductive viability of these kids, because a human being's only value is a baby factory. It's about protecting the insecurities and the control issues of homophobic and transphobic parents. Period. These policies are being rolled out because that's who her base is. And these policies are being rolled out at the time that they are because she wanted a long enough run-up to be able to do some faux consultation, which, again, we FOIPed. We know exactly what the point of that consultation was. It was purely to ask the question, how do we implement these policies? She wants to survive her leadership review, and she doesn't care how many other kids don't. And she leans into it in the video, too. She got right into the guilt side.
Sincerely ask that as we discuss and debate this proposed legislation, both before and after it is tabled, that we do all we can to depoliticize the discussion and focus on the well-being of the children and youth most affected by these policies. They each need to know that although adults may strenuously disagree on what policies are in a child's best interest, each of us loves and supports them in becoming the person they want to be regardless, and will be there for them if they ever want to talk or need our support. That commitment and care by all of us for these children and youth should not be questioned by either side of a political debate.
Fuck you, Danny. And I say that because this was not politicized until you decided that you literally wanted to make policies to politicize it. This is a conversation that should only be happening in doctors' offices. This is a conversation that should be happening with the person who's experiencing the gender dysphoria. This is a conversation that should be happening with the appropriate medical and psychological supports. And ideally, if the parents are supportive and involved and engaged and they have made their own child feel safe to have that conversation with them, which I would just like to reiterate is such a painfully low bar to have to attain. You pulled it out of those offices. You decided that you needed to make policies and do a whole PR campaign about it, not because it's the right thing to do, because all of the evidence says very clearly the contrary, but because this is a policy that's in the same vein as the conspiracy theories, like the chemtrails. And you don't care who it's going to hurt. It's all about just making the policy happen in whatever form is going to make it the least likely to be legally challenged. How do I know? Because there was one other clip from that Edmonton town hall that we haven't played yet.
As a child. In Alberta, we don't allow children to drink, smoke, or vote under 18. But a child under that age is now going to be allowed life-altering surgery transitioning. Please advise why this position has changed, especially in the face of such an aggressive campaign against the innocence of our children.
Look, I mean, what we have to do in government is do the possible and make sure that our legislation doesn't get struck down. And there is lots of jurisprudence that says that at some point along a child's development, they get the right to make their own decisions. And when it comes to healthcare, that age is somewhere around 15, 16 years old. You can be emancipated from your parents at age 16. You actually can apply to the court to be independent from your parents. And so that's part of the reason why we said 15 and under, you cannot make these decisions without your parental involvement, decisions even to start social transitioning. And we're just not going to allow puberty blockers or surgery. We're not going to allow surgery under the age of 18 because that's life altering. But the medications that we just believe that we'll end up having a lot of legal challenges. It's pretty difficult when so many legal judgments have been made that kids can go on birth control, they can have babies, they can emancipate themselves from their parents at 16. It'd be pretty hard for us to say, sorry, you're not going to be able to be allowed to do this at 16 and 17. So we thought 16 was the right age to at least allow that to begin, but they still won't be able to take surgeries until they're 18 or over. They can't drink.
It's all about what you can get past. Doesn't matter what the evidence is. Doesn't matter that how many people have pointed out that the puberty blockers are pointless for most kids after age 16 because most kids are already well into puberty at that point. It defeats the point of the drug. Doesn't matter. What matters is passing the legislation in such a way that they can declare it a win so she can throw this red meat to her base. And that's all it is. And it's for that reason that we saw Amnesty International call out the province of Alberta again. This happens too much. We get called out by Amnesty International way, way, way too much. But Amnesty International issued a statement where they said Amnesty International joins Egal Canada, Momentum, and 2S LGBTQIA plus communities in strongly condemning these policy measures. These changes not only violate the constitutional rights of 2S LGBTQIA plus people, but also pose inherent harm by perpetuating existing stereotypes, discrimination, stigmatization, and exclusion. What Premier Smith and the Alberta government are proposing is, in a word, appalling, said Ketty Nivyabandi, Secretary General of Amnesty International's Canadian English-speaking section. Trans Albertans, including trans children and youth, have a right to compassionate and distinctions-based gender-affirming care, full stop. The potential long-term impacts of these policy changes on the health and well-being of 2S LGBTQIA plus youth and communities are dire. But it's just about the kids, right? It's not like we're seeing major shifts in government policy that specifically exclude trans folks in any way. It's not like, I don't know, as guest of the show and delightful human being for the record, Marnie Panis pointed out, literally just yesterday, the Scholarship to Advance Gender Equity, the Person's Case Scholarship. This is it's literally called Person's Case Scholarship. I'm laughing because this is so painful. Person's Case Scholarship. In order to be eligible, you have to identify as a man or a woman. What is the point of the Person's Case Scholarship? It supports women and men studying in the arts, humanities, and social science fields whose work advances gender equality, and who are studying in fields where their gender is underrepresented and disadvantaged. You have to identify clearly as a woman or man. It's so clear. It's so abundantly clear what's going on here. It's mind-blowing that there's anybody who's denying it anymore. This is about, I like things simple. I like my men to be men. I like my women to be women. I don't want any confusing stuff in regards to what's going on in another person's pants, even though it's none of my goddamn business to be concerned about what's in their pants anyways. I am so tired of the conflation that exists that somebody who is non-binary somehow also equals predator, because it's simply not true. There's no reason to know what plumbing a person has unless you're the physician or part of the medical team that's managing their care or one of their intimate partners. After that, it doesn't matter. But it's all about catering to those insecurities. It's all about catering to those fears. It's not in any way about leadership. You know what the crazy part is? We're only halfway. Alberta Politics. I remember I went back a little while ago. We're doing a little aside here as a slight break from all of that. I remember a little while ago, I went back, I looked at the first episode of the breakdown that we ever did. I think it was 20 minutes. And we thought we were hitting all of the content of like the month. That's where we are now. Moving on from there and starting to step into the next sort of segment, the chunk of the show. We're going to talk about the victim services changes. October 1st marked the first major change, the implementation of the Alberta UCP's new victim services model. Now, the UCP claims that it's to improve stability, consistency, and sustainability of police-based victim services. But what they've done is they've ended all funding to all of the RCMP-based victim services units in Alberta. They're doing 4 regional ones instead. So they're going to have offices in Western, Eastern, Central, and Southern, and those centralized departments are going to run the victim services. But there's a lot of people who are very unhappy about this with a lot of good reasons. And there's 2 big pieces with this story that we got to kind of parse out. The first one is, why are people unhappy? Well, from the story that we have on the screen right now, Paul McLaughlin, president of Rural Municipalities of Alberta and the Reeve of Ponoka County, says his area isn't receiving the same level of service. He notes that the town of Rimbey, which is located within Ponoka County, used to have a full-time person dedicated to victim services, but says that's no longer the case as the position has been reduced to half-time under the new model. Full-time equivalents are increasing, but the number of full-time equivalents that actually have interaction with people that are the victims of crime or dealing with tragedy in their community, those are decreasing. So the same government that said, there's too many managers, there's not enough front-facing staff with AHS, have just created a model. This, for the record, is me editorializing, not Paul McLaughlin. Have just created a model where it's bureaucracy heavy and people are actually losing frontline resources. From the same story, former Three Hills Victim Service Program Manager Carolyn Kung agrees that the change to the regional model puts proper care levels at risk. Because of that, people will suffer, she said. That's one thing about if you had a volunteer board who just fundraised to make sure that we had a full-time person in those kinds of places. Now we don't have that. We've got somebody who's in charge of the program managers and they're basically overseeing it. Also, the program is costing a lot more money and they're not having volunteers in each program that were passionate about what their communities are doing anymore. So it seems like everybody's losing in this one, which isn't great. So you have to ask yourself, well, why are we doing this thing? Well, let's take a look at what's actually mechanically happening. The province of Alberta has pulled the funding for the victim services stuff away from the RCMP. So this goes back to the whole debate and conversation around policing in the province of Alberta. Danielle Smith has made it very, very clear that she's going to go out of her way to denigrate the work that the RCMP do. When she was at that same municipalities conference, she gave inaccurate, incorrect numbers and was called out for it. But what did she actually say about the RCMP?
Alberta has 2 provincial police forces.
Yep.
Are you referring to RCMP and sheriff?
I was.
How does that make sense? Does that not add more cost, red tape, bureaucracy to managing 2 concurrent provincial police forces?
Well, we've got the City of Edmonton and City of Calgary, each have their police force, as does Tabor, and so does Lacombe, and so does Medicine Hat, and Grand Prairie will soon. I think that that demonstrates that having different options for different communities makes sense. The reason we're doing it is because the RCMP has not been able to fill the need that we have. We pay for 1,911 officers, and they have 400 or 500 vacancies. And we cannot allow for municipal or for rural communities to be under-policed. And so we have trained up our sheriffs to a point where they have the same training as police so that they can do more work in being able to operate across the different police forces. As I mentioned in my talk, they already do surveillance, have for some time. Our scan team shuts down drug houses, and we're regularly seeing results from that. Our fugitive apprehension team has been extraordinarily successful. 3,000 executed warrants and 350 really bad dudes being captured and kept incarcerated. And so we've rolled out a similar team of 7 in Calgary to be able to help down there. Our highway patrol I mean, as if you talk to any highway patrol officer, they say that one thing is consistent, that bad guys need a getaway, and they're using our roads, and so that's one of the ways in which we apprehend criminals. So I would say I'm very pleased with the work of our sheriffs. And when Mike Ellis came in, he was actually surprised that there was so little additional training that we needed to be able to get them up to the same standard as police. So we just want to give more options, and I think that's better.
Now, there's a lot to unpack here, because now all of a sudden Alberta has 2 provincial police forces. She considers the sheriffs to be another provincial police force. Secondary to that, she's saying that if municipalities don't want to go with the RCMP and they don't want to go with building their own police force for themselves, they can get a sheriff's detachment, which is a lot. The numbers are all wrong. Let's just leave it at that. All of the numbers that she gave there are pretty much wrong. But here's how wrong you have to be. This is, every once in a while we get a DM and we're like, whoa, what happened there? And this was one of the DMs, and we've confirmed that this is who we're going to say it is. This DM came from somebody who is literally inside the sheriff's department. Danielle Smith, we were shocked at how little training it took to get them up to speed. They're at the same speed as the RCMP now. Mike Ellis, shocked. Mike Ellis, a former Calgary police officer, by the way. Do with that what you will. Mike Ellis, shocked at how little training there was. The call literally came from inside the sheriff's house, because we got this DM. Surprising little training. There hasn't been any training yet. The sheriffs are still peace officers, not police. A group has been seconded off working on what this upgraded course might look like, which is to get approved by the Director of Law Enforcement, and the estimates I've seen are 8 to 12 weeks. Sheriff normally gets 16 weeks to be peace officers, and police services normally take 28 weeks to do their curriculum. So 8 to 12 weeks. 2 to 3 extra months of training to upgrade is in line with that. Also, there isn't any capacity to any current training academy to put 1,000 sheriffs through an 8 to 12 week class with the bodies to backfill those vacancies while people are away training. That was sent to us by a sheriff. But this is where the conversation gets so big-ish. But it's not the only place that Danielle Smith mentioned the sheriffs in the last week.
Sheriffs and the numbers, the RCMP having some issue with the numbers that you quoted. Your response to that? I mean, they're saying that, I think you said it was 1,900 RCMP with 400 vacancies, something like that. And they said, no, it's 1,700 and 324 or whatever the numbers were. What's the reason for the discrepancy?
Well, they do have folks who are on leave. So we've got vacancies because they haven't been able to fill them. And then we've got vacancies because we've got people on leave for various reasons. And in typical practice, when somebody goes on leave, you find a temporary replacement for them. So we still have 400 vacancies, regardless of the reason why those aren't being filled, and that's a problem. And so what we know and what we heard when we did our rural consultation is people don't care what color of uniform an officer is wearing when they show up, whether it's a municipal officer or a sheriff or an RCMP officer. They just want someone to show up when they call. And it's quite clear to us that the RCMP is having recruitment troubles, and so we're continuing to offer to municipalities research grants so that they can see if they want to shore up their policing services a different way. Grand Prairie took us up on that, and they're shifting from a RCMP to a local municipal force, just like Calgary and Edmonton have. And we're hearing that others want to have a sheriff's detachment. So that's where we're going, is we're going to make sure that there's all kinds of options for those, especially those in rural Alberta, so that they're policed properly.
But not all municipalities are on board.
Well, look, I mean, if you ask Calgary and Edmonton, would you like to collapse your police service and go back to the RCMP? I'd be interested in knowing that answer. They'd probably say no. I'm asking the communities that are policed by the RCMP, whether they're happy with the service they're getting. And if they're not, we're prepared to help them move to a municipal force, just like Calgary and Edmonton have, or to even set up a sheriff's detachment. So I'm not, if they want to keep their RCMP, they will. If they want to try something else, we'll support them in that.
See, now there's some things that we need to tease out of there. First of all, that's a trap. And it's a trap because, as a certain municipality in southern Alberta learned, if you have the RCMP and you then go, which, by the way, a significant amount of federal funding pays for the RCMP to be in that community. If you then go, you know what? We don't like the RCMP anymore. We're going to go with the sheriffs or Timmy's policing or whatever. I don't care. You lose that funding. You don't get access to that funding back. You can't just flip a switch and go back to the RCMP. If you do, you'll be paying the full price. So to say, hey, communities, if you want to give something else a try, we fully support you in that. It's going to totally screw your tax base going forward, but that's okay because we'll swoop in with the sheriffs. But there's another little piece there that, and I know we played that clip last week, but I really wanted to play it again because there's another little piece there. Because if you have somebody, we got to have the frontline people, making sure the frontline people, they're on the streets, they're doing the things. I just want to go back to that message we got from the sheriff. A group has been seconded off working on what the upgrading course might look like. So even the sheriffs, when necessary, move people off of the frontline roles to go do the other things. So just because somebody's been seconded off to do something doesn't necessarily mean there's a vacancy. It just means that the greater system is maneuvering itself to cover so they can do some of the other things. But even the sheriffs do it. So that was wildly entertaining to me. But what are we talking about here? What's the broad strokes? What's the goal? And this is where, again, we have to talk about the Free Alberta Strategy. For anybody who's been unfamiliar, we talked about it for like a long time, and then we didn't talk about it for a while. And then when we talked about it like 2 weeks ago, everybody was like, "Wait, what's that?" So we're gonna talk about it again. Free Alberta Strategy, short version. It's a document written by Rob Anderson, who's now Danielle Smith's right-hand executive director. We've got Barry Cooper, long time Alberta sovereigntist, Alberta separatist. We've got Derek Fromm, who was Danielle Smith's lawyer during her whole leadership campaign. They wrote this document, and it's got some pretty clear goals. And when you take a look at the policy agenda that we've seen from Danielle Smith in the UCP, under all of these things, some of these long-term goals start to make sense. We've got the Alberta Sovereignty Act, check 1. We've got the Alberta Provincial Police Force, check 2. We've got the Independent Banking Act, which is an act designed to move more people to things like the Alberta Treasury branch and credit unions. And here's Danielle Smith talking about the fact that she wants to bring in Sharia law compliant halal mortgages to the Alberta Treasury branch, allegedly. We have the Equalization, Termination, and Tax Collection Act. So Danielle Smith wants to, the Free Alberta Strategy, is advocating for more centralized tax collection through the province of Alberta. We should collect our own taxes. Cough, cough. Didn't we just talk about that again at the municipalities? Oh, we did. Oh, look, we've got the Alberta Pension Plan. There's a couple of other points, but the big thing to take away is the final resort. I love that they called it the final resort. The Republic of Western Canada, the democratic independent process. So the Free Alberta Strategy is all about positioning Alberta in such a way that it would be able to separate from Canada. Don't believe me? Let's go directly to the document just for ease of reference here. So what does the Free Alberta Strategy actually have to say when it comes to separatism? In the event that Ottawa refuses to recognize Alberta's provincial rights of sovereignty and instead continues its strategy of economic tyranny, co-opted management of our resource sector, and the marginalization of our citizens, it may leave our province with no other recourse but to leave Confederation entirely. Although national independence is a path of least resort, living under the rule of a cabal of Eastern political elites that Albertans have not and will never elect, and whose goals and agenda mean economic and societal devastation for our people, cannot possibly be an option worth entertaining. An ancillary feature bonus feature of the Free Alberta Strategy is that it will better prepare Alberta for national political sovereignty should it become necessary. It also, it also involves a great expansion of our provincial regulated financial institutions and interprovincial government affairs, which will be naturally required should independence become the only viable option for the province. In short, it sets Alberta up for independence in the event that independence must be considered. So let's be crystal clear here. We got a roadmap of the legislative agenda of Danielle Smith's UCP. We can look at all of the major policy initiatives that Danielle Smith's UCP have pursued. Free Alberta Strategy, the Alberta Pension Plan, the Alberta Police. All of this stems from a document that was written by her executive director, not 10 years ago, not 20 years ago. It was written in September of 2021. This document is 3 years old. It was released in the run-up to Danielle Smith's leadership run. At a certain point, it becomes irresponsible to not ask the question, hey, is there maybe something going on here? Because it seems like the policy agenda that Danielle Smith is pursuing is one that sets Alberta up for separation, which again is such a dumb idea for so many reasons, not the least of which is that Alberta exists as a province because of the Crown. And the Crown has treaties with all of the First Nations and Indigenous peoples who literally, it covers every square inch of Alberta. All of the treaties do. And I've said it before on the show, I'll say it again. In order for Alberta to leave Canada, they would have to convince all of the First Nations and Indigenous peoples who, I don't know, maybe have a little bit of a history of getting screwed, that this time, you can trust the white folks, because depending on the day, Danielle Smith does say that she's either Cherokee or Métis, so it'll be fine. But this is the agenda that Danielle Smith is wittingly or unwittingly pursuing. Which brings us, oh dear. Which brings us to Adriana. Adriana had herself a bit of a week, she did. Didn't go great for Adriana this week. It was not smooth. So let's start with the it's just such a perfect clip. Adriana LaGrange went to Hinton, Alberta, and she went to Hinton, Alberta to announce the fixing of rural healthcare. And she was doing that by announcing 3 sets of numbers. One of those sets of numbers was for a program to keep physicians in rural Alberta. One of them was to initiate training for medical first responders, which are basically, if you want to fill the space between like that first aid CPR course that you did that one time when you were going to be a counselor at camp, and paramedics, that's where the medical first responders would sit. They're good to have if you don't have a paramedic, but let's be very, very clear. They're not paramedics. And that's not me being elitist, because most medical first responders are also volunteer firefighters. And they will be happy to tell you that they love it when the paramedics show up on calls, because there's a much bigger toolbox to play with. But she had to announce those 3 programs with the 3 numbers that were attached to them. It did not go well.
Money is in play for the 2-year bursary and the 3-year program.
The 2-year bursary, okay, I need my binder in front of me. I know it's $8 million for the, let me just get it so I give you the exact numbers here. It is, should I have that right at my fingertips here? too many pieces of paper, but let me get that for you.
Oh, okay, thank you. We'll get that
We'll
information
follow up.
over.
Yeah, the $8 million over 2 years is for the qualified medical students, so that's the bursary program. Is the $8 million over 2 years, and for the medical first responders grant, it's $800,000 for the grant program, and then $600,000 for the emergency medical responder education grant.
My favorite part about that clip, other than how exquisitely painful it is, my favorite part about that clip is watching the MLA to LaGrange's left. The gentleman on the right is the mayor of Hinton, but the gentleman on the left is another UCP MLA. And just watching him intermittently lurch forward as if he could somehow stop the car crash that's unfolding in front of him is just, that's my favorite part of that whole bit. But the AMA, the Alberta Medical Association, they issued a bit of a response to the announcement of the new funding to retain physicians, and it wasn't great. The minister's announcement today on training future physicians in rural areas where they live is not a new strategy. The strategy has been used since the late 1990s to increase the number of rural physicians in the province. Alberta universities offer medical student and resident rural training programs through which learners study with practicing physicians. There are even Alberta-specific published studies that explain why these programs have not always been successful and what government has to do to sustain the traction of the program. So saying this announcement will revitalize rural healthcare is an exaggeration. Additional support and funding for rural medicine are always appreciated, but the minister's announcement fails to address the parallel and accelerating crises Albertans are facing. 1, in rural generalist and family medicine, and 2, in our acute care system. Goes on to say a bunch more. There was another question that came up, which we're gonna talk about in just a sec here. But first, because only in Alberta, Hinton has had a bit of a problem keeping their emergency room open because of the shortage of physicians that they've been experiencing. And it's just the absolute chef's kiss that Adriana LaGrange went to Hinton to announce, hey, we're going to fix rural healthcare the day after a closure of the emergency room, but also with a closure happening immediately after she left. So revitalizing and stuff, I guess. But she also made an announcement while she was there in regards to the question of vaccine availability. And this gets to be real important as we head towards the home stretch of all of the topics before we get into the FOIP.
Family doctors, especially here in Calgary, say that they have not received any flu vaccines or COVID vaccines this fall. Last year, they had received the flu vaccine at this point, and a lot of seniors have been wondering where they need to go to get these vaccines. So why is that the case? Why are these vaccines not being delivered in a timely manner? And what is your ministry doing about that to fix this?
Well, this falls under the purview of the federal government. So the federal government are the ones that approve through Health Canada the vaccines for any particular year. They'll approve a particular vaccine for a particular strain of flu, et cetera, for COVID, RSV, et cetera. We are awaiting that finalization, and then they are also the ones that procure en masse for the whole country. And my understanding is we are on track to receive our vaccines by October 15th, which is next week, or shortly thereafter. I think we're the 3rd, so within 12 days. My understanding that we are still on track, but this does fall within the purview of Health Canada, and we continue to advocate to make sure that we get the vaccine quantity and in a timely fashion from the federal government.
Now, there's a communication strategy that a lot of people say politicians should utilize. And that strategy is answer the question that you wish you were asked, not the question that you were asked. And that can work with a pivot. It can work if you qualify. That's a really good question, Tim. I'd love to talk about why the vaccines aren't specifically available in why they're specifically not going to be available in doctors' offices. But I think the bigger question would be, why is the federal government taking so long? Right. If you do that qualifier, then you can get away with it. It's gross, but you can get away with it. If you don't do that qualifier, then it's just misleading. And as we saw in a story that came from CBC News on October 4th, LaGrange's answer appears to be just misleading. Also, before I move on, I got to give props to Disordered YYC for that clip because they're the ones who clipped it, and they're awesome. You should go follow them on Twitter right now. In the story from CBC, they talk about a memo that says the distribution of provincially funded vaccines to medical and nurse practitioner clinics was temporarily paused in April when a contract with the distribution company expired. At this time, Alberta Health has not been successful in contracting a distributor to ship vaccines to community medical and nurse practitioner clinics, it stated. It went on to say a recent expression of interest had closed and no submissions were received. Now, where it gets complicated, though, is CBC actually reached out to the company that used to do it. From the story again, CBC News reached out to Accuristics, the company that had been contracted to distribute the vaccines. In an email, the company said Alberta Health elected not to renew its contract. Our contract was not renewed, but we were pleased to help HS with the physician distribution and hope to hear from them, said Dean Berg, president of the healthcare logistics company. A spokesperson for Alberta Health said the contract was not renewed because its term had expired, which is a wild sentence to read out loud, because isn't that why you would renew it? Because it had expired? If the contract was in effect, would it need to be renewed? So at the end of the day, what's happened with the vaccines in the province of Alberta is they have centralized the distribution channels. You're going to have to go to the public health clinics, or you're going to have to go to a drugstore like Shoppers Drug Mart, who are then going to be able to profit off of the administration of that vaccine. One of the big things that has been identified, and if only we'd had a recent real world example of a public health problem that we could have learned from. If only something like that had recently happened, where we could have learned that when you want uptake on things, one of the biggest things that you have to do is reduce barriers to entry. So if physicians have the vaccines in their clinics and somebody comes in for their routine whatever, or they want to talk about that ingrown whatever, the physician can say, hey, while you're here, would you like a vaccine? And then the person can go, oh yeah, that would totally save me a trip. I would love to do that. Yes, please. Please give me the vaccine. Or they can say no. That's up to them too. Get vaccinated, but it's up to them too. This is a deliberate creation of barrier to entry. It's also worth noting that it decreases yet another potential revenue stream for family physicians, because family physicians would be able to bill in the same way that Shoppers Drug Mart would. Shoppers Drug Mart, or any of the other major pharmacies, aren't dealing with failing bottom lines that are seeing 58% of Shoppers Drug Marts or London Drug Marts going out of business and leaving the province. That is the reality of what we're seeing in family medicine right now, though. So it's kind of a deliberate move, and it's dangerous because it also adds to the perception. And again, I want to be really clear. I'm not dunking on pharmacists. I love my pharmacist. They're fantastic, and they have helped me and my family in many ways. But I would not go to a pharmacist for a whole lot of diagnostic stuff. And I say that not only as a husband and a parent, but I also say that as somebody who works in healthcare. And my views in no way represent my employer. So one of the things that you learn is it's best to go to the people who are good at doing the things. So pharmacists absolutely have a role in the primary care network, but they are not the primary care network, and they shouldn't be talked about like they're the primary care network. This furthers that perception that your pharmacist can be your one-stop shop for all things healthcare. And they're not. They're just not. And that's not me denigrating pharmacists. That's just me saying the reality of the situation. Moving on from there. I'm going to take a long sip for this segment. The moment, one of them that you've all been waiting for, after an hour and 40 minutes, I'm so sorry. We got to talk about, we're going to bring back one of our segments that we haven't had in a while. Bring it back. Are you FOIPing kidding me? Because one of the things that we've been quietly doing for the last few months is we've been filing some FOIPs. And we've been filing some FOIPs because we have been trying to make sense out of this. This picture. There is so much going on in this picture. And we talked about it, I think, back in July or August, because we started looking into things and we were like, oh, this seems, oh boy, there's so much going on here. We need the grown-ups, because the farther that you go down the rabbit hole, the more ridiculous and, quite frankly, dangerous it gets. So we handed off everything that we had to the grown-ups. But that didn't mean that we stopped digging. And it didn't mean that we stopped talking about the things that doing inquiries as such. And so we've been doing a series of FOIPs, and we have some more results that we'd like to share. Now, before we do, I want to just put the picture up on the big screen here, because this is, again, from the semifinals game in Vancouver that Danielle Smith flew out to with at least one staffer. We know at least one staffer because you can see Rebecca Bullock sitting right beside Danielle Smith there. It's a bunch of other people in the picture. You can see Dave Abey and his family. He was invited by Danielle Smith. So the story so far has been that Danielle Smith was gifted the skybox seats by a private citizen, which is a fascinating term to use, because that private citizen is actually somebody that she had appointed to the board of Invest Alberta just a few months prior. So, private citizen / very wealthy employee, do with that what you will. A lot of questions there. But there's also a lot of faces in that photo that are quite familiar. We're going to, not tonight, we're not going to unpack it all the way tonight, but we're going to be unpacking that in 2 weeks. We'll talk about that in a little bit, because tonight we're here to just talk about one thing. Because as I said, if you look at that picture, you can see there's Rebecca Bullock right there, Danielle Smith sitting there. Who all went to the game? We'd love to know. There was some vague reporting, by no fault of the reporters, to be clear, because the Premier's office was being deliberately opaque in regards to what went on in order to, A, get that skybox, and B, get all of the people in that skybox. Now, we wanted to know who went, how to work. So we filed a FOIP. And what our FOIP, the question of the FOIP was, seeking all records as defined by Section 1Q of the Act related to which staffers accompanied Premier Danielle Smith at any NHL games the Premier attended from May 3rd to June 25th, 2024, including out-of-province or out-of-country games, and in what capacity they staffed her. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting, because we got some results back. What's interesting is Danielle Smith is already on the record saying that she accepted gifts from the Edmonton Oilers of tickets to games in Edmonton. Danielle Smith has claimed that one of the biggest reasons why she needed to make the changes that she made to the conflict of interest laws and policies, regulations for staffers was because it was so critically important that she was staffed at these events. But here's the thing. We only got the results back for one game. It almost seems as if Danielle Smith was not staffed by any staffers in any kind of an official capacity for the two playoff games that she attended at Edmonton, which is fascinating because, again, the whole reason why she needed to make the changes was so that she could be staffed at these events. But there's no record of any staff having staffed her at any of the other two events. What there are, though, is a couple of very interesting records in regards to who staffed her at the Vancouver event. Now, before we share all of this, I just want to highlight again, no matter how you cut it, for Becca Polak and Marshall Smith to attend that game was a violation of the regulations that exist for staffers, because those tickets were absolutely worth more than $500. And if they accepted them in the course of doing their official staffing duties, that needs to be approved by Marshall Smith. If they accepted them outside of their official duties, that would be a violation of those regulations. So no matter what, we can safely say with a high level of confidence that whichever staffers attended violated the conflict of interest regulations for staffers. So what happened? Let's take a look. One of the results that we got back comes from May 6th, 2024, 5:05 p.m. It was sent by Jeanette Lee, who is the Mission and Visits Coordinator. Here you go, James. I've booked all of the 6 rooms. James then passes that on to a number of people. One of them is Elliot Houle, who is the Director of Tour Office of the Premier. Another one is Catherine Stavropol. I'm so sorry, Catherine. She's the Executive Assistant to Premier and Tour Coordination. It also went to Terry Stelmack, which is, and this is as a fun little aside, one of the fun things about the FOIPs that we do is every once in a while you find it's a little Easter egg that you find in the story. It turns out that Terry Stelmack is not just the sergeant performing the role of operational support coordinator for the sheriffs. He's actually Ed Stelmack's son. He's been doing the job for 20 years. Didn't know that before we filed the FOIP. So there's your one little piece of absolutely harmless, but maybe interesting if you're a political geek information. Shauna and Jill. James Fisher forwarded that on to Shauna Shepard and Jill Black. Shauna Shepard, worth noting, is the executive assistant to Marshall Smith from the Vancouver downtown hotel, the Marriott. Both of these emails that James Fisher percolated down went to Marshall Smith and Becca Polak specifically regarding their bookings. So Marshall Smith and Becca Polak were confirmed to have stayed at a hotel paid for by the taxpayers for this trip, which they went on their personal time. $532.17 each. So these are 2 separate hotel reservation confirmations. So what we have so far is the apparatus of the government of Alberta booked hotel rooms for 6 people. 2 of them are confirmed to be staffers. It's safe to assume one of the other ones was Danielle Smith. And given that and the involvement of Terry Stelmack, it's also probably safe to assume that the other 3 are Danielle Smith's security detail. We didn't get any emails on that. So do with that what you will. But we can say 100% the government of Alberta resources were used to book hotel rooms for Marshall Smith and Becca Polak. But it gets even more interesting because one of the other records that we got was an email sent, and this gets to be important, May 15th, 2024 at 2:01 p.m. Let me just say that again so it sticks. This email was sent May 15th, 2024 at 2:01 p.m. It was sent by Shauna Shepard, who is again the executive assistant to Marshall Smith. Hi, Crystal. Can you please send requests to pays as soon as possible to Marshall Smith and Becca Polak for $471.88. The attached invoices for hotels were paid by RGR Mission and Planning P card. So right here it says, excuse me, all of those hotel rooms, those 6 that were booked using a P card or a purchase card that was affiliated with Intergovernmental Relations, Mission and Planning, government infrastructure, government money was used to book all of those hotel rooms. But on May 15th, Shauna says, hey, can you issue request to pays to Rebecca and Marshall? And this is, again, it gets to be fun because we only got one answer back in the next step of the process. So the government said, hey, on May 15th, oh, yeah, those 2 people, super embarrassing. We totally used all of the government resources to pay for things. And we totally used all of the other things to make these trips happen. And they were able to, and this is wild, the reason why it's $471.88 and not the $500 that's on the original invoice is because, not the $532, is because it was booked with government stuffs. They got a pass on the GST and the PST. So they each saved $50 because it was booked with government things. The payment, we were provided the payment records showing that, in fact, Becca Polak did pay the money that day. May 15th, 2:34. She got the payment thinger. May 15th, 4:10 p.m., she paid the bill. Now, what's fascinating is we got sent those things saying the money was requested, the money was sent. We didn't get anything for Marshall Smith. Now, we're absolutely not saying, for I'm sure a litany of legal reasons, that Marshall Smith didn't pay the 471 discounted government rate, less PST and GST, just because we asked for all of the records and we got Rebecca Polak's records, but we didn't get any saying that Marshall had paid. We're not saying that Marshall didn't pay. We have no evidence to say that Marshall didn't pay. We just find ourselves in the uncomfortable position of having no evidence to say that Marshall did pay. So there's that. So what do we know so far? Because there's a kicker coming. You have to know it. What do we know so far? What we know so far is that the trip, at least for the hotels, was booked by the government of Alberta. It was paid for by the government of Alberta using taxpayer money up until May 15th, when at the very least, Rebecca Polak, at the request of Marshall Smith's office, paid back the cheaper rate that she got because she was a government employee. What's the kicker? I mean, in and of itself, that's not great because government resources were used to book this trip for 2 staffers. Is there any way it could get more uncomfortable? You have to know the answer is yes. Because if you go back to the Globe and Mail story, Premier Danielle Smith attended a hockey game on personal time. None of her expenses were paid for by the government of Alberta, except for, presumably, that hotel room. Sam Blackett, her spokesman, said in a statement May 13th, Premier Smith traveled with 2 staff. Both paid their own expenses. The hockey tickets were provided by a private citizen. All rules under the Conflict of Interest Act were followed. Let me read that again. In a statement May 13th, Premier Smith traveled with 2 staff. Both paid their own expenses. That appears to be a lie. Because it wasn't until May 15th that the request for payment was made. And we can prove, because we have the records right here, that that payment didn't get made until 2 days after Sam Blackett apparently said they paid on May 13th. It seems like, theoretically, a fairly small thing to misrepresent. And to be clear, there's nothing in this FOIP that says Sam Blackett wasn't told that they hadn't paid their own way. There's nothing to suggest in this FOIP that Sam Blackett in any way deliberately misled the Globe and Mail in issuing the statement on May 13th saying that they'd paid their own way. There's nothing to say that. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he was told that they did, but they didn't. And at the end of the day, there's no getting around the fact that government resources were used to book this personal trip on personal time that resulted in 2 staffers getting a not insignificant discount of not having to pay the taxes of another province for their personal vacation time. And this is where, again, the question that should be asked by any reasonable person is, there is a whole lot of bullshit going on with this situation. Why is there so much bullshit going on with this situation? Wouldn't it have been easier, simpler for Danielle Smith and co. to have simply said, hey, you know what? We got given these tickets and we changed the rules. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with us accepting them. We invited, I don't know, a bunch of our closest friends. We invited the premier of BC. We invited some other folks because we wanted to. The tickets were nice. We didn't want to let the tickets go to waste. They were super nice tickets. And yeah, maybe it's not a great look that it was given to them by an employee, especially not a recent appointment to a board that has got some questionable spending activities. But yeah, we just wanted to go. It was easiest and quickest for us to book all of the tickets through the government of Alberta. So we did, but we always planned to have Becca and Marsh pay it back. It just took a little while to get all the communication sorted out. It's a nothing burger. It's nothing to worry about. Yeah, Danielle Smith stayed in a nice hotel, and so did Marshall Smith, and so did Becca Polak, but they paid the money back, so whatever. Don't worry about it. Or they're going to pay the money back, so whatever. Don't worry about it. That's not at all what happened. From day one, this situation has been misrepresented. It has been misdirected. And the press has been lied to. The Globe and Mail was clearly lied to. Now, again, I'm not saying that Sam Blackett was anything other than the deliverer of the lie. And I'm not saying that he had any knowledge of the lie because he's already threatened to sue us twice. But clearly, 'twas a lie. And there have been a great many lies. And so why is it that the staffers have clearly violated the conflict of interest regulations? Why is it that there's so much effort going into covering this whole thing up? And how did they get out there? I wonder what plane they flew to go out there. So many questions that could probably only be answered by doing a deep dive on who's everybody in that picture. Which brings us, not that picture. That's Adrienne LaGrange. That one's easy. Which brings us to the end of the episode and the little update for the next 2 weeks. This thing is such a complex mess. It is an unmitigated shit show of influence peddling and conflicts of interest, and I would feel comfortable calling it corruption at this point, given that we've got politicians and staffers deliberately lying to the public about violating their own regulations. I feel like that's a safe assessment, given that the information that the government has itself provided through FOIPs, instead of just being transparent, instead of just being accountable. So we're going back to the interview schedule for the next 2 weeks, which is to say we have 2 interviews that we are so excited to present that we're going to be recording over the next few days. One of them is going to go up on the Sunday, and the other one is going to go up on the next Sunday, because we need some time to untangle this whole mess, and assuming, hopefully, again, super fingers crossed, hoping that the real reporters and the real journalists, because we're just hacks and podcasters here, that they are able to tell this story in a complete and comprehensive way. But as we have said since we first talked about this months ago, the breakdown will not allow a universe to exist where as much of this information isn't made fully public before Danielle Smith's leadership review, because it is simply an unavoidable conclusion that there has been a stunning amount of influence peddling, of favoritism, of potentially corruption that has gone on in the provincial government under Danielle Smith's watch. And the people who are attending that AGM, who believe the lies that Danielle Smith serves up on the regular, that have been documented on the regular, at least have the right to know how badly they're being lied to. And we'll probably do maybe next weekend is like a Thanksgiving thing. We'll find a way. Maybe Monday night. We'll see what happens. Maybe Sunday night. We'll see what happens. We'll do another open mic special, because one of the things that we have heard from a lot of you is we miss the open mics, and we miss the open mics too. I miss the open mics because I don't have to talk for 2 hours. I get to tag somebody in after the first hour, and then we just have a nice little conversation. So make no mistake, this is not us shutting down the open mics because we don't like the open mics. We absolutely love the open mics, and I cannot wait to bring them back. So we're going to find a way to bring in a standalone open mic, and we'll make sure that we provide plenty of lead time so that anybody who wants to talk about any other things to do with Alberta politics can. And we're going to be back with our next breakdown style episode. I just want to double check the date here, on October 27th, because that'll give us the run in right into the legislative session. That'll give everybody who's attending the AGM a week to digest everything. If you're looking for our brand of satirical, well-informed commentary on all of the goings-ons of Alberta politics, unless there's an emergency, then please keep an eye on all of our socials, as the kids say. But we're very excited to be presenting the interview episodes that we're going to hopefully be able to bring to you over the next 2 weeks before we come back with this whole dumpster fire. And I already know what shirt I'm wearing for that episode. Let me tell you. All of that being said, this is where I got to do the plugs and the things and the stuff. So, first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to the chat. I haven't had a chance even tonight because it's been so busy, and the video clips have been so short. I haven't had a chance to look at the chat at all. I'm really looking forward to signing off and getting a good look at the chat. I want to thank you, everybody who's in the chat, who's part of the little community that we have going on here. You guys are so amazing, and it just fills my cup up to read all of the comments from all of you and how you work with each other and you feed off of each other. So big thank you to everybody who is hanging out on the on the chat. I want to say a big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. We have, with all the stuff that's gone in the last week, we've already blown through our FOIP budget. We have a FOIP budget. We set aside money for FOIPs every month. We've already blown through that because of the amount of bullshit that the provincial government has served up. So we want to thank everybody who signed up to be our Patreon supporters there, because you keep the lights on, you keep the gear going, you keep all of the internet things happening. If you're somebody who wants to sign up to be one of our Patreon sponsors, you can do that at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. If you're somebody who's not big into the regular, you're not looking for the long-term relationship, then you can send an e-transfer to info@thebreakdownab.ca. And we have some things and stuff that we'll be rolling out as we get the results back. So big, huge thank you to everybody who's supporting the show financially. I also know that there's a lot of folks in our audience who do not have the means to do so, and I don't want anyone feeling bad. Like, share, subscribe, do all the social media things that come for free, because all of that goes a long way to help us grow our audience and get us in front of more eyes and into more ears. All of that being said, tonight's episode was a bit, the last 20 minutes was fun. I had a lot of fun with the last 20 minutes because I love catching these people in lies. It's just fun. But was a bit of a dirge for the first hour and a half. So, as has become the breakdown tradition that we've returned to, here's your little clip of Danny.
I tend to be pretty trusting.
I don't. Not anymore. But that clip still makes me laugh every single time. Big thank you to everybody who has sat through the last 2 hours of this, whether you've done it live or you're watching the video on one of our streaming platforms, or you're listening to the podcast version after the fact. Thanks for showing up, because it means a lot to all of us here. And that's the other thing I said I was going to say this week. I want to be really clear here. This show exists because of a team. And I am so grateful and lucky and blessed, in all of the positive words, that I have the privilege of working with a team of people that do this show on a volunteer basis, many requiring an anonymity to do so, but are passionate about speaking truth to power and holding the people in the corridors of power to account. It is one of the great privileges of my life that I get to be the voice for this show, and I can only do that because of the amazing folks that toil away in the background. So I just wanted to say that, because the people were starting, oh, Nate's so awesome. I'm really not. And this show is a thing because there's a lot of people who care. And that's the message that I want to leave this week with. I know it's fucking dark out there some days. And when you have a premier who lies as much as she does, and who is willing to mislead people when she knows the truth, and she's willing to weaponize and harm kids in order to save her own political skin, that's bad. And I know with the Free Alberta Strategy, there's a lot of bad. And I don't want to minimize any of the bad, but I'll tell you this, the thing that keeps me showing up every week is the fact that there are so many good people who stand against this kind of thing. And a lot of them are just learning how to do it. But the vast majority of people don't want to be lied to. They don't want to be misled. And they know that they're better than what this current government is serving up. And so there's a lot of good people out there. They just need to get loud. and they are starting to get loud. I think that I was talking to a friend a couple days ago, and I was saying, you know what? I think there was the COVID fatigue that set in, where everybody was just like, oh, I just want to be done with this. And a lot of people kind of, that's why you see the drop in the vaccine. One of the reasons, one of them is also shitty leadership, but that's why you see the drop in the vaccines take up. That's why you see not many people taking masks as seriously as they used to. And if somebody wants to wear a mask, fill your boots. They shouldn't be derided for that. But there is a fatigue of the COVID grievance that I'm starting to notice. A lot of people are starting to get fed up with the people who refuse to get up off the COVID cross that they have chosen to nail themselves to and continue to do so just so they can be the great victims of the pandemic. The freedom folks. There's a lot of people who are starting to get, it's gone past the point, and people are starting to get quite frustrated and more than a little bit annoyed. And I think that those are the folks that I'm betting on, the ones that are saying, can we just have enough of the bullshit, please, and thank you very much. So that's my spiel. I will commit. We will find a way. I'm going to get some dirty looks for this, but we will find a way to make a live call-in show happening. Really looking for, I don't want to say the names of the folks that we have for the interviews yet, because I don't want to jinx it, because they're so good. But we have those set up, and keep an eye out for those. Keep your chins up, and we will see you at the very least. And here's the great news. I mean, here's the plus side. If the journalists, the real journalists, step up and they pull the trigger on this thing before the 26th, then we'll just be back with a regular roundup, and it'll be awesome. And that's what we all want to have happen. So, maybe it won't be that long, but otherwise we'll see you for another roundup in a couple weeks. In the meantime, and in between time, take care of yourselves. And as always, keep the conversation going.